Hello, my name is Dr. Christine Fruhauf, and on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Lori Yancura, and our entire team from Colorado State University and the University of Hawaii at Manoa, I would like to welcome you to our first webinar of the GRANDcares project. Lori, please say hello.
Aloha. Welcome to the webinar. We're so happy to share this information with you. Let's get started.
The title of our first webinar is Strengths-Based Approaches to Working with Grandfamilies. Before we begin today, we would like to acknowledge and thank our funder, the United States Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Children, Youth, and Families at Risk, Sustainable Community Projects for their support of this work. Further, we would like to acknowledge three colleagues of ours, Jana Carson and Dr. Nancy Mendoza, for their assistance on the content included in this webinar, and Ruth Wilson for her technical assistance with recording and posting our work. As we previously stated, this webinar is funded by USDA NIFA SciFAR project. This particular webinar meets one of our three project objectives. The objectives of this project are to first focus on grandparent self-care. We're doing this by offering the Powerful Tools for Caregivers Grandfamilies 6-week class to promote self-care practices and stress reduction techniques while connecting grandparents to community resources. If you're not familiar with Powerful Tools for Caregivers, please go to powerfultoolsforcaregivers.org. Our second objective is to focus on the grandchildren. And we've done this by creating and implementing a 6-week course to build self-care and leadership skills among 9 to 12-year-old grandchildren who are in grandparent homes. Finally, it is well known in the literature that service providers working with grandfamilies want more education and information about the complexities grandfamilies experience on a daily basis. Further, grandparents often state they are leery of working closely with case managers, social workers, and sometimes school liaisons for fear of losing their grandchildren. As a result, our third objective of the GRANDcares project is to create webinars for service providers with the hope of increasing the ability of providers' strengths-based approaches to effectively support resilience in grandfamilies. I want you to take notice for a second on this slide that we actually use the same picture to represent both grandparents and service providers. We consciously did this because grandparents are a lot like all of us. They're people whose grown children are unable or unwilling to care for their grandchildren, or excuse me, their own children. From our experience working with grandparents, they are doing the best to bring stability to their grandchildren's lives. We also would like you to know, when Lori and I say service providers, we include case managers, social workers, mental health counselors, family liaisons, school teachers, and other interested parties, including, but not limited to, support group facilitators, extension agents, and community volunteers. With that stated, the purpose of this webinar is to briefly sensitize you to what grandparents may be experiencing raising their grandchildren, and to offer suggestions and tools for approaching your work with grandfamilies from a strengths-based approach. So I want to first begin by asking you to close your eyes. I want you to think about being 67 years old, and if you happen to be 67 years old or older, for this exercise, imagine you are 10 years older than you are today. So in your mind, please just answer these questions. What is your work status? What does a typical day look like for you? How often do you spend time with friends? What do you enjoy doing? What do your finances look like? What are your plans for the next 10 years? Now, you are the same age and you agreed to be the primary caregiver to 2 grandchildren. Your grandchildren include a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old. So now I want you to answer these questions again, but this time, thinking about what it might be like to be a grandparent who are raising 2 grandchildren. So what is your work status now? What does a typical day look like for you? How often do you spend time with friends? What do you enjoy doing now that you're raising your grandchildren? What do your finances look like? And what are your plans for the next 10 years? So Lori and I would like you to take a moment and think about these questions. Did you notice the differences between your answers in these two experiences? What changed? What remained the same? How is your life different than it was before raising two grandchildren? I'd like you to make some notes to yourself, whether it's in your mind or on a piece of paper, about your feelings regarding this change. Do you feel overwhelmed? Oftentimes, grandparents tell Lori and I, and we read in the literature, that they are overwhelmed by the complexities that they're experiencing. Sometimes grandparents often say they're confused. They're not quite certain if their adult children will take these grandchildren back on. Sometimes they say they're angry. They might be angry at the adult children. They might be angry at the situation. And sometimes they say they're sad. Maybe they're also grieving a loss. Maybe just the fact that they can't be the fun-loving grandparent anymore. They're now the parent. Yet we also know that grandparents are happy. They might be excited to take on this new parenting challenge. Grandparents raising grandchildren often feel all of these emotions. They may also be hopeful and relieved that their grandchildren are safe and secure in their care. Next, Lori is going to take us through why grandparents are raising grandchildren.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. And I'd also like to add that grandchildren often feel all those emotions as well. So the situation can get really complicated when you've got all these family members experiencing the same situation, and they act in many different ways. So why are grandparents raising grandchildren? Well, the earliest literature from the 1960s and 1970s indicated that grandparents were raising grandchildren because the children had been abandoned, a parent had died, or their parents were divorced. Since that time, more and more grandparents are raising their grandchildren due to the children's parents' problems. It can be drug, alcohol, and abuse. And especially today, we've got grandparents raising their grandchildren due to the opioid epidemic, unsafe environments for the children, neglect of the children. Most of these reasons are due to challenges faced by the middle generation. These can be such things as incarceration, deportation, and not wanting to have grandchildren in foster care. Even though these are common challenges, they certainly do not cover all of the reasons grandchildren may be in grandparents' care. Each reason is accompanied by a slightly different set of challenges. So it's important that you get to know the grandparents with whom you work. So related to this, grandparents' caregivers face a number of challenges. These include having trouble with covering the extra costs associated with raising grandchildren, difficulties with their adult children, especially when those children are struggling with substance abuse or legal trouble that I mentioned on the last slide, challenges associated with their grandchildren's behavior, distractions from their own marriages and social relationships, legal issues associated with their adult children's issues or obtaining permanent custody of their grandchildren, health challenges, and navigating their grandchildren through the current school system, which has changed quite a bit since last time they are involved with it. Many grandparents face several of these challenges at the same time. The more challenges they face simultaneously, the more burden they feel and the more they need help. From a strengths-based approach, we want you to know that despite these challenges, or maybe even in some cases because of them, grandparents are strong, loving, resilient, caring, and resourceful. Many grandparents tell us that regardless of the challenges previously discussed, they would not change their situation, and they're grateful and happy to have their grandchildren in their homes. So one approach that we believe works well with families and is our driving approach for the GRANDcares project is a strengths-based approach. At its most basic, the strengths-based approach encompasses the provider's philosophical stance as well as their understanding of how individuals persevere in the face of adversity. To fully practice from a strengths perspective, the provider, that's you, must embrace the philosophy of working with grandparents as partners and truly fostering mutual collaboration. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from an article on the strengths-based approach. The strengths-based approach obligates us to understand, to believe that everybody, no exceptions here, has external and internal assets, competencies, and resources. Thus, it would be counterproductive for a practitioner to tell grandparent caregivers how they can better take care of themselves. Instead, it behooves the provider to believe that every person who is challenged by struggles will learn from them and therefore has intrinsic knowledge and skills about themselves. So often in practice, assessing for strengths is easier said than done. And we all know this. Sometimes when you see someone struggling, it's just easier to tell them what to do. But that's not the strengths-based approach. Be patient with yourself and with the grandparents you work closely with. With time, you can move away from operating from a deficit model into a strengths-based approach. And we can learn the strengths-based approach by thinking through our comments or questions to grandparents. For example, the opposite of a strengths-based approach is a deficit-based approach. In this cartoon, the service provider focuses on deficits by saying, "Your child is a terrible reader." Well, this may be the truth in some cases. How do you think it makes the grandparent feel? Yes, it makes them feel powerless to do anything about the situation. If services are delivered by focusing on deficits, in this case, the grandchild's problems, they're not very likely to help grandparents. Now, here's an example of a strengths-based approach. In this cartoon, the service provider focuses on strengths by saying, "Your grandchild is doing great in math, but may need some assistance in reading. What tools or resources do you have that you can use to help them read?" How do you think stating the issue this way makes grandparents feel? Yes, it makes them feel empowered to come up with solutions. The comment and the follow-up question focuses on the positive first and then guides the grandparent to tap into his or her strengths and resources to support the grandchild. It focuses on grandparents' individual skills and experience and even opens the door to more solutions. If the provider then discovers that the grandparent is struggling with finding a plan for assisting the grandchild in reading, then the provider and the grandparent can explore other areas together. They're partners in the relationship. With time, you can move away from operating from a deficit model on the left into a strengths-based approach on the right. So Christine, wow, time has flown.
Yeah.
It's time to wrap up our webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lori. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain to us the strengths-based approach. And I hope all of you listening today will practice this and utilize this when working with grandparents and grandchildren. So this concludes our webinar, and we hope that you join us for upcoming webinars discussing topics such as microaggressions in grandfamilies, trauma in grandchildren, and action planning, a key component to the self-management and self-care model that we are using with grandparents in the GRANDcares project. If you have any ideas on topics you would like to see discussed in the future, please send either me or Lori an email at christine.fruhauf@colostate.edu or loriana@hawaii.edu. We also would like you to recognize that we do have a website, grandcares.colostate.edu, that we encourage you to check out as well. In addition to more information on the project, we do have other resources that might be utilized both in Colorado and Hawaii if you happen to be there, but also nationally. Finally, in an effort to assist us in future planning, please complete the following short survey. Tell us what you think. And on behalf of the Colorado and Hawaii GRANDcares project team, I want to thank you for visiting us today and viewing this webinar.
Aloha.